Hey, Luke here. So in this video, I'm going to give an overview of Dungeons & Dragons, a brief introduction, if you will. However, let's not fool ourselves. The topic of how to play Dungeons & Dragons could never be fully or perfectly explained in any one video, no matter how long or perfect it is. Anyway, I'm just going to explain at a very high level the basics of the game and how it's played. Now, the first thing to understand is that Dungeons & Dragons is not a game in the traditional sense. What do I mean by that? Let's take a game like Monopoly. You have a bunch of players, say 5 of them, sitting around a board taking turns. Now, all 5 players all have the same role in the game. I think that's like an entrepreneur or something like that. In a game like Monopoly, in a traditional game, all the players start on equal footing with the same goal to win the game. However, in Dungeons & Dragons, not everyone who participates in the game has the same goal or the same role. Most of the participants are called players. However, there is one special participant called the Dungeon Master, or DM for short. Now, we're going to get into the differences between players and Dungeon Masters in just a moment here, but right now I just want to make the point that they both have different roles and different goals in the game. Now, the next way that Dungeons & Dragons differs from the traditional game is that there aren't any real winners, and there aren't any losers either. As a matter of fact, the players aren't even competing against each other in Dungeons & Dragons. The players are on the same team, and they're working cooperatively toward the same goal. Well, at least in most D&D groups. And that one special participant, the Dungeon Master, he isn't even on the same team as the players. In fact, he's on a team all by himself. More on that in a bit. Now, most other games take place over the course of an hour, let's say if you're playing Sorry. If you're playing Monopoly, it might take a little bit longer. If you're playing Risk, maybe a few hours. If you're playing Axis and Allies, yeah, let's not get into that. However, a game of D&D could take place over many sessions spread out over months or even years, assuming that you have a campaign that lasts that long and the players all stay together. You see, all of the players are going on an adventure, and that adventure might span the course of a couple game sessions. That might take a few weeks or a few months. And then after that adventure is done, well, there's another adventure to go on, and another after that. And you string all of those adventures together, and you have a campaign. And then you have a game that lasts a year or more. Fun stuff. And there's also something called a one-shot, and this is basically a D&D adventure that is designed to take place in one game session over the course of, say, 3 or 4 hours. If you go to a game convention, you're gonna find yourself more than likely running a one-shot.
Okay, yeah, whatever. Just tell us what the game's about.
So, D&D in a nutshell, the players control characters who live in an alternate world, usually some sort of medieval fantasy world. For instance, these characters might be a wizard, a barbarian, a rogue, and a warlock. Now, all of these characters who are played by the players form an adventuring group that travels together throughout this world. And this group of characters goes on adventures in the world, which is why they're usually referred to as adventurers and an adventuring party. Now, these adventures might be something like delving into a dungeon to defeat an ancient evil, or it might be something as simple as defeating an evil dragon that has been plaguing a nearby village. By the way, that's where the name Dungeons & Dragons came from, just in case you were wondering. Now, that's not to say that all adventures involve Dungeons and Dragons. However, those are just the classic icons of the genre.
Okay, the players control their characters in the world, got it. But what does a Dungeon Master do?
The Dungeon Master controls the medieval fantasy world and everything in it. You see, the players control one character, however the Dungeon Master controls everything else. He controls the world, he controls the people in the world, he controls the events in the world. Furthermore, the Dungeon Master controls and often creates the adventures that the players and their characters go on. The only thing that the Dungeon Master doesn't get to control is the players' characters. Only the players can control their own characters. This is often referred to as the players having agency. But everything else is fair game to the Dungeon Master. Yep, everything else. Now, the Dungeon Master is often considered the most critical participant in the game because she lays the groundwork that makes the entire game possible. So what does the DM do that is so important? The DM is often referred to as running the game because she is the catalyst for lots of things in the game. First, the DM often creates the details of this world the game takes place in. For instance, What are the cities that are there? What are those cities' names? And who lives in them? How are they ruled? Now, creating all of the details of a fantasy world is a lot of work, and that's why there are pre-built worlds out there such as Forgotten Realms and Dark Sun, and DMs who choose to do so could easily run their games in those worlds. And that's what I do, by the way. Next, the Dungeon Master often creates the adventures that the player's characters will go on. That ancient evil in the dungeon? Well, the DM planned that dungeon out, he placed the monsters there, and he planned the treasure the characters would find. Oh, another D&D term. So, the player's characters are often referred to as player characters or PCs. Much easier to say. Now, DMs don't have to create all of their own adventures. There are modules available for purchase, so DMs could go out and buy those modules such as Curse of Strahd or Storm King's Thunder and run them at their tables. Modules are full adventures that are written by writers, obviously writers write things, and game designers, and DMs could buy these and run them at their tables. Now, both of these things, creating the game world and creating the adventures, are things that the DM has to do outside of gameplay. That means that on his own time, he is preparing the game for the players to play. So you can see that we have been talking about quite a few things that the Dungeon Master does, and we still haven't actually talked about what he does when everybody finally gets together to play. The final role of the Dungeon Master is to actually run the game once everybody has gathered together to play. But what does that mean? First, it means that the Dungeon Master describes the world that the PCs are in. That room, that table, that chest, presumably full of treasure, and that odd scraping sound coming from behind the door. And then, when the PCs take an action, such as opening that chest, the Dungeon Master describes what happens as a result. You creep forward toward the chest, you check it over for traps, and when you don't see any, you open it up. Inside, you see glittering coins and a silver rune-covered dagger.
Awesome, I take the dagger and start pocketing the coins.
Now, the DM also controls other people in the world. They're called non-player characters, or NPCs. Now, as the players adventure in this world, they're going to encounter lots of NPCs, such as goblins, and the Dungeon Master controls all of them.
I tell the goblin to tell me where the gems are, or I cut off his arms!
Oh, yes, I'll tell you where they are. They're in the gem box.
Finally, I think, the Dungeon Master is responsible for adjudicating the rules. So there are lots of rules of how to play the game. That's what all the cool dice are for. In fact, it's totally within the DM's prerogative to change the rules to suit her game and her players. So those are the different duties of the DM, the things that describe her role in the game, but what is the actual goal of the DM? Create a game in which the players have fun. At the end of the day, the DM is an entertainer. She's responsible in a large part for the fun of every player at her table. And when the game session is over and all of the players had fun, well, then the DM did her job well, and probably had fun too. Alright, that's enough about the DM. Let's talk about the players. Now, a player's job is much simpler. He simply controls one character, let's say it's a wizard, and he decides what that wizard will say and do in the game world.
I plan to kill every last goblin scum on the face of this earth. I cast a fireball spell at them, and as they're all burning, I get up and dance.
A player should also know what his character's special abilities are and how they work. For instance, a wizard should really know how his own spells work in the game. In most D&D games, the player's goal is to play through the adventure that the Dungeon Master lays out before them. Defeat the ancient evil, slay the dragon, rescue the princess, you know, that sort of thing. And once the players complete that adventure, the DM is sure to have another adventure, and another, waiting for them. So Dungeons & Dragons can technically go on forever as long as the players all want to keep on playing and the Dungeon Master keeps creating adventures for them. Now, you may have heard Dungeons & Dragons referred to as a role-playing game, an RPG, and that's because the players and the Dungeon Master are playing the role of other people. The players play the role of one other person, their character, and the Dungeon Master plays the role of everyone else. Now, role-playing basically means that the person playing that role will place themselves into the shoes of that person whose role he's playing and think, what would I say and what would I do given these circumstances? In fact, it's a lot like acting.
That sounds like fun! What stuffs do I need to get started?
Well, first of all, you need people to play with. A group of 5 usually works out pretty nicely. One person is the DM and the other 4 players. Next, grab some dice. You'll need a D20, D12, D10, D8, D6, and D4. You'll need at least one of each, but it's often useful to have several of each type. Right, more D&D terms. So basically a D20 means a 20-sided die, and a D10 means a 10-sided die. You're gonna need some pencils, preferably sharpened, and paper, and of course you need the rules. Now you could go out and buy the player's handbook. Both the players and the Dungeon Master need this. And also buy the Monster Manual and the Dungeon Master Guide. The Dungeon Master uses these things. Or you could go get the basic rules for free over on Wizards of the Coast website. I'll put a link down in the description for that. If you've never played the game before, then I recommend just starting out with the basic free rules, and then if you and your friends like the game, well, you can go buy the full books if you want to. And I'm pretty sure you'll like it. Now, some groups also play with miniatures on a grid, and these have the advantage of making battles much more tactical and, in my opinion, interesting. However, miniatures can be fairly expensive, and they're by no means required. Tons of groups have lots of fun playing without miniatures, and that style of play is often referred to as theater of the mind. Well, hey, I hope you found this video useful. If you liked it, hit that like button down below and consider subscribing for more videos. Most of the videos that I create are geared toward helping dungeon masters, and I like to get into the nitty-gritty details of running better games. If you still have questions about playing the game, please let me know down in the comments. Until next time,
Let's play D&D.